The Renaissance was a cultural movement that began in Italy in the 14th century and continued through the 17th century. By late in the 16th century, the movement had spread throughout Europe. For visual arts, one of the most distinguishing features of the Renaissance was the development of a realistic linear perspective. A linear perspective is when the illusion of space and distance is created on a flat surface. The Renaissance was defined by many great artists, but the most influential are contributed with defining the three phases of the cultural movement. The first phase includes Bentivoglio di Pepo. He was an Italian painter from Florence, and he was regarded as the last great artist whose work was in the Byzantine tradition. The second artist to be mentioned is Giotto di Bondone. He was Bentivoglio's student and is attributed with being the first great artist to contribute to the Renaissance. The practice of drawing accurately from life started with Giotto. The last to be mentioned in Phase 1 is Arnolfo di Cambio. He worked in Rome as a famous sculptor, and his works decorated many cathedrals in Italy. Probably the most famous is his statue of St. Peter in St. Peter's Basilica. The first to be mentioned in Phase 2 is Masaccio. His works had a significant influence on other artists in the Renaissance. He was one of the first to use scientific perspective and paint in a natural style, which influenced realism. Realism is the depiction of subjects as they appear in everyday life, without embellishment or interpretation. Next is Filippo Brunelleschi, who was one of the most prominent architects and engineers of the Renaissance. And lastly, for Phase 3, Donatello was a prominent sculptor. His St. George and the Dragon relief is one of the first examples of central point perspective. For Phase 3, we start off with Leonardo da Vinci. He was a mathematician, an engineer, inventor, anatomist, painter, sculptor, architect, botanist, musician, and a writer. He is known as the Renaissance man and is considered to be one of the greatest painters of all time, and possibly one of the most diversely talented people of all time. Today, people still line up to see his paintings. Michelangelo is the last to be mentioned, but was a contender for the title of the Renaissance man. He was a painter, sculptor, architect, poet, and engineer, and his most famous painting is that of the Sistine Chapel, and his most famous sculpture was a statue of David. He is also responsible for the design of the dome of St. Peter's Basilica in the Vatican. These are the artists that made the Renaissance a period of enlightenment. And in order to give you a better picture of the progression of realism, let's look at some of these paintings, one after the other.